Hello everybody, welcome to the Wonky Angle, where I talk about electronic music, both new and old. And today, I'm talking about the new album from Disclosure, Alchemy. Oh hey, Disclosure are back. Wasn't expecting this, but I suppose I'll take it. I guess this will mark my fourth time doing a video on this commercial deep house duo. I've covered all their previous three albums, even though two of those reviews are pretty dang old at this point. The Caracol review especially. That was one of the first videos I ever made on this channel. Their last album, Energy, from 2020, I personally thought was pretty dang solid. Has some of their best tracks ever, and I generally felt it was even pretty underrated as a complete whole, even if it wasn't especially cohesive. And I do understand all the people who marked it as a letdown. Also, the pair of EPs they put out before it, Ecstasy and Moonlight, are the best work they've done in my opinion. I mean, I may have eventually grew to love their big obvious breakout, Settle, as much as everyone else. But I feel like these guys are at their best when they lean away from the vocal guests and poppier flares, and more towards, sample-based cuts that they pulled from disco and funk and soul, or even more traditional African music. They had really nice eclectic taste in samples, which I thought was cool. And the combination of the Ecstasy EP and the Energy album, when put together in that order, ended up notching an honorable mention for my year-end list that year. With that said, while I have mostly enjoyed their most recent work, I'll admit that when I saw this album dropping completely out of nowhere with basically no lead-up at all, the knowledge of its existence didn't necessarily elicit the level of excitement out of me that maybe their last project did. Not just because I found their last EP never enough to be a forgettable letdown, and they all were also one of the bands that I unfollowed on Twitter when they jumped on the NFT craze. But also because, well, I don't know if I'm really itching for their particular brand of commercial deep house and garage as much in 2023 as I might have been even as recently as 2 years ago. Disclosure may have really stuck out from the crowd when they broke out a decade ago. I mean, back in 2013 they were sharing space with the big bombastic festival EDM crowd, and their much more subdued and subtle approach, even if clearly subservient to formulas from decades before them, did really give them a unique identity within the specific scene they came up in. But, I mean, now house and garage revivalism has really been in full swing, especially as of the past year and a half, with dozens of popular artists from Odessa to Diplo to Bonobo to even Beyonce, or newer names breaking out like Fred again, all trying their hands at some of those old school house and garage formulas. We've had absolutely no shortage of material that fills the exact same niche that Disclosure typically fill. And at this point, I felt like they'd probably need to give their sound a bit more of a twist to be able to stick with me more. And to their credit, Alchemy is definitely a unique point in their catalog that shows them moving in a different direction from any of their previous albums. Apparently their label contract expired, and to celebrate the occasion, they saw fit to make an entire album that featured no vocal guests and no samples. At the very least, not basing entire tracks around samples. Nothing but straight-ahead dance music in its purest form, releasing on Apollo Records. And when I saw that last point, I briefly got really excited, until finding out, no, that's not the same Apollo Records that Aphex Twin released 8592 on. That is just an imprint for their own self-release. Oh well. I wasn't exactly going out of my mind with anticipation for this project, but, I was mildly curious and figured, hey, I covered all the others, what's one more? At worst, it'll get me some traffic. And after hearing Alchemy, yeah, it's pretty solid. I didn't like it as much as Energy, but it wasn't too far behind. And I feel like this one might be more likely to go down well with fans, since, they're really doubling down on that current trend of exploring retro dance formulas and focusing specifically on the personality that they bring to the table on their own, minus any pop crossover guests. It's a good reminder that these guys have really solid instincts for dance music that they can rely upon, which allows them the freedom to strip things down as much as they did here. The album's even got a decent amount of variety too, although from the way it starts, nothing really sounds out of place from what you'd already expect out of them. They hit you right away with two pretty straightforward house cuts in their usual style. Looking for Love, that one had some kind of off-putting vocal processing that I wasn't really a fan of, but the tune and melody behind everything and the tight grooving bass lines won me over in the end. And Simply Won't Do, despite not having as strong a tune, did have just as strong a house groove backing it up. But where these guys really started to pull me in and surprise me was Higher Than Ever Before, which shows them diving headfirst into old school jungle and liquid drum and bass. Lots of crashing amen breaks on that one, going over the cleaner synths and airy vocals in the background. This track was super refreshing and went really hard in the same way that, like, a Bachelors of Science track might. I wasn't expecting them to make something like this, but it went over really well. Definitely the best track on display here. And then they hit you with A Little Bit, which has one of the strongest house grooves and hooks out of any tracks in that style here. Really strong danceable beats, a simple but dramatic and heartfelt hook joined by lots of uplifting synth washes. I definitely fucked with that one. Go the Distance, meanwhile, feels like the latest cousin to tracks of theirs like Bang That and Get Close, and maybe also My High a little bit, stripping things down to just the beats and the bass line with their deep-voiced hooks repeating the same things over and over. All low-end with no melodic top lines and relying on nothing but the groove to carry it. It's admittedly not one of my favorite tracks they've ever done in this style or one of the biggest standouts on the album, but I appreciated being here to break up the sound a bit more. After an R&B flavored a cappella interlude in Someday, which is nice and pleasant, they start to hit you with a bunch of tracks that lean away from the vocals altogether. Tracks like We Were in Love or Sun Showers, which might still have little tiny bits of vocal samples in the background, but they're no longer the focus. The rave stabs or filtered chords, respectively, bring in a lot more of the uplifting energy on their own. They just feel like, you know, regular old 90s rave instrumental cuts, and they're pretty well made for what they are. We Were in Love is probably the stronger of the two. But then they hit you with the not really interlude Purify, which goes for an entirely beatless ambient approach, but ended up really impressing me anyway, thanks to how expansive and well layered all the melodic synth pads they surround you with are. Just really creates this especially pretty and sweet breather moment that honestly has more dramatic intensity than most of the other tracks here. It's one of my easy favorites, despite possibly acting more as a transitional element in context. Alas, it's also the last track here that really hit for me, and the album has a bit of a weak finish. Brown Eyes is another deep house cut in the same style as the first two tracks, albeit a lot shorter and less well developed. Like, the first half of the track is all kind of wind up, and then the core of the track is about a minute and a half long before it cuts out. I mean, the groove is solid as all the others when it's there, but the tune isn't all that memorable, and it's gone before it even gets the chance to stick. And then the album closes with Talk on the Phone, which, you know, tries to get a bit more romantic with, like, some smoother acoustic guitar textures joining in and some more personal-sounding R&B vocals. Although the vocals have some of the same processing I didn't really care for that were on the opener. And, I mean, while I feel like the track is, you know, trying to finish things off on a marginally more optimistic note from how the song itself sounds and how it's melodically constructed and stuff, I'm sure it's the kind of stuff that'll connect better for other people, but I'm very neurodivergent and cannot relate to the idea of a track with lyrics about actively yearning for a phone call, especially with all that emphasis on the phone. I mean, I get yearning for human connection, but I freaking hate talking on the phone. It's a minor annoyance I'd rather avoid at best and actively anxiety-inducing at worst. On those entirely petty personal grounds, I marked it as my least favorite track here, but, I mean, I don't actually take that much issue with it outside of that. I know that is just a me thing. But yeah, that's Alchemy. The album's pretty good. I do also like how a lot of these tracks have some, like, sort of, you know, kind of interstitial field recordings acting as transitions that sound like they're trying to sound like the guys just took microphones with them while they were traveling and stuff, even though they're probably made out of externally sourced sound effects. Especially with that one moment where I heard an announcer for getting on Alchemy Airlines. I don't know, I still thought it was a nice touch that added to the more personal feeling approach to the project. It kind of gave me similar vibes to that Fred Again album from last year, although I obviously enjoyed this more. Now, is this album the kind of thing that's going to stick with me longer term, or that I'm going to be keeping around and coming back to a lot over the course of the year? I don't think so. I mean, the duo showcases all the same talents they've proven to have over the course of their previous career, and they did prove that they don't need to rely on their guest features to make good music, which, I mean, I kind of already knew that from the moments throughout their previous projects which didn't have guest features, but now that it's just played out for a whole album, I'm continuing to hold out for a full album of stuff in a similar style to their Moonlight and Ecstasy EPs. And I'd be game if that album had a bunch of stuff that sounded like the material on this album, too. There's a lot of ideas here that did surprise me and I wasn't entirely expecting from them, and that went over pretty well. But I've had the feeling for a few years now that these guys have the potential to put out, like, a properly amazing dance album, and this ain't that. This is just a good dance album that has more of the feeling of, like, a quick side venture than a main event. It's plenty of fun while it's on. It's definitely worth hearing if you're already a fan of theirs. Might even catch the ears of some who weren't feeling them before and wanted them to move away from the mainstream sound more. It's a good album. Just, don't go in expecting your mind to be blown. So, yeah, I mean, I'll overall let this get away with a 7.3 out of 10. But of course, this is just my opinion. You can feel free to disagree with it, but I'd like to hear your thoughts, so leave the comments in the comment thing down there. Shout out to my Patreon supporters. There are some people. You want to add yourself to that list. Link to my Patreon is in the description. But yeah, that's pretty much it. That's all for today. See you next time.